Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit für das deutsche Vaterland.
The communist regime is long gone, but it left an enduring legacy. One feature is the 1,200-foot-tall TV tower we're passing by right now. This tower was built in 1969 to celebrate the 20th anniversary of communist East Germany. The tower was meant to show the power of the atheistic state at the very time when DDR leaders were having the crosses removed from the country's church domes and spires. But it turned out that when the sun hit the tower, the reflected light created a huge cross on the mirrored ball. Cynics called it God's revenge. It had another nickname. Because of its shape, East Berliners dubbed their tower the Tele Asparagus. They also joked that if it fell over, they'd have an elevator to freedom in the West. Unter den Linden. Unter den Linden is the heart of Imperial Germany. During Berlin's golden age in the 1800s, this street was one of Europe's grand boulevards, the Champs-Élysées of Berlin. It was lined with linden trees, so as you promenaded down, you'd be walking unter den Linden, under the linden trees. Over the centuries, aristocrats moved into this area so their palaces could be close to their kings. After World War II, this part of Berlin fell under Soviet influence. Unter den Linden was the main street of former East Berlin.
Right behind you, this is the old commander's office. And the next building, this is the Crown Prince's residence. And right behind us, what we can't see, and it's under renovation anyway, so we can't see a thing, the old Royal Armory. My favorite museum today in town, the German Historic Museum. I've been in there 30 times or so.
Berlin of the 1800s was graced with grand new buildings, like those that lined either side of this stretch of Unter den Linden. The style was neoclassical, structures that looked like Greek temples with columns and triangular pediments. One of the first and still finest is on the left, called the Neue Wache. The Neue Wache, or New Guardhouse, was built in 1816 as just that, a fancy barracks for the bodyguards of the Crown Prince. Over the years, the Neue Wache has been transformed into a memorial for fallen warriors. It marks the tombs of Germany's unknown soldier and an unknown concentration camp victim. The inscription in front reads, "To the victims of war and tyranny." Start by looking across Unter den Linden. That's Humboldt University, one of Europe's greatest. Marx and Engels both studied here before going on to start the communist movement. Other distinguished alums include the Brothers Grimm. Both of them, and more than 24 Nobel Prize winners. Albert Einstein taught here until he fled Germany to join the faculty at Princeton in 1932. Today, used booksellers set up their tables in front of the venerable university. We're approaching a large equestrian statue in the middle of the boulevard. Atop the horse is the one guy from Berlin's early history that matters most, Frederick the Great. Frederick ruled as King of Prussia in the mid-1700s. He turned his capital, Berlin, into a world-class city. Prussia, like ancient Sparta, was all about its military. Voltaire famously said, "Whereas some states have an army, the Prussian army has a state." Under Frederick's rule, Berlin became a wealthy and cosmopolitan city. Bebelplatz, the square of the books. In Frederick's day, this square was the cultural center of his capital. In many ways, it still is. When you reach the center of the square, spin counterclockwise to take in the cultural sites, some of which date all the way back to Frederick's time. Facing the square is the former state library. It has a long history and was funded by Frederick the Great. More recently, Vladimir Lenin studied law here during much of his exile from Russia. Bombed in World War II, the library was rebuilt in the original style only because Lenin studied here. Next to the library, the square is closed by one of Berlin's swankiest lodgings, Hotel de Rome, housed in a historic bank building. The round Catholic St. Hedwig's Church, nicknamed the Upside-Down Teacup, is a statement of religious and cultural tolerance. Like all Catholic churches here in Berlin, St. Hedwig's is not on the street, but stuck in kind of a back lot, indicating inferiority to Protestant churches. Up next is the German State Opera, originally established in Frederick the Great's time. Over the centuries, it's been damaged and rebuilt. It was bombed in 1941, rebuilt to bolster German morale and to celebrate its centennial 2 years later in 1943, and then bombed again in 1945. Look down through the glass. The room of empty bookshelves is a memorial to a notorious event that took place right here during the Nazi years. It was on this square in 1933 that staff and students from the university built a bonfire. Into the flames they threw 20,000 newly forbidden books. Books authored by the likes of Einstein, Hemingway, Freud, and T.S. Eliot. Overseeing it all was the Nazi propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels himself tossed books onto the fire. As the flames rose up, he declared, "The era of extreme Jewish intellectualism has come to an end, and the German Revolution has again opened the way for the true essence of being German." Think of it. This square had been built by Frederick the Great to symbolize culture and enlightenment. Hitler purposely chose this square to thoroughly squash those ideals by burning all these books, dramatically signaling that the era of tolerance and openness was over. Hitler was establishing a new age of intolerance, where Germanness was correct and diversity was evil. A plaque nearby has a quote by the 19th century German poet Heinrich Heine. The Nazis despised Heine because even though he converted to Christianity, he was born a Jew. His books were among those that went up in flames on this spot. Read Heine's prophetic quote, written in 1820. "Where they burn books, in the end, they will also burn people."
And he wrote, "This was just a foreplay. Where they start to burn books, they will eventually burn people."